So one of my favorite things about gratitude is the fact that, or one of the biggest lessons I've learned about gratitude, I should say, is that even in the midst of suffering, even in the midst of hard times like we find ourselves in right now during this quarantine, we can immediately go back. Once life gets normal again, we can immediately go back to take things for granted. And I saw this time and time again in my life, whether it was in Ranger School, whether it was in Dominican Republic. I went on several mission trips there. I went to mission trips in Nicaragua. I've been to Afghanistan on deployment. And it's like whenever you're in the midst of those kind of times, whenever you're in the midst of trying times, you can so easily think, man, if I just had this, I would never complain again. If I was just home again, I would never complain again. You know, if my life was just X, or if I just had this type of like aspect of my life again, I would never complain again. I most deeply felt that when I was in Ranger School. Literally, when I was in Ranger School, I looked back and I said, you know, when I was like, my best day at Ranger School was worse than my worst day in college. So like whether it was like going through a breakup or failing a test, whatever it was, whatever my worst day at Mount St. Mary's University was, my best day at Ranger School was still a step below my worst day in college. And so I thought when I was leaving Ranger School after starving and struggling and pushing myself mentally and physically more than I ever had before, I was like, you know what? It will never be this bad again. But what really blew my mind was after after we knew that we were graduating, it was that first week. It was that last week of Ranger School. It was the first week of like kind of like being a graduate and like knowing you were finishing. And we had 2 10-hour passes that week, and we had a lot of freedom, and all these things would kind of come back to our lives. I got to see my mom. I got to see my friends. I got to see all these people in my life who I knew loved me and cared about me. And it was really an incredible experience. But what blew my mind was it was the first day that we had this long pass, and we got to go to restaurants. We got to see our family and our friends and all this stuff, that people came back and they were complaining already. And I'm like, you know, I've been here for 4 months at this point in Ranger School. And I'm just like, how, after going through so much struggling, after going through so many hard times, how can we come back and immediately be taking things for granted again? And that's what we all run the risk of doing right now during this quarantine, is that after you get back to life, you can start taking things for granted again. And so I want to talk about what that decision point really looks like. And I learned it today. It really came to me today in Mass. So I got to go to Mass yesterday. I had a crazy experience, but today I got to go to Mass again. Yesterday I went to Mass, and it was a Spanish Mass. It was kind of a surprise, but today I got to go to an English Mass in a beautiful church in Bellevue, Kentucky, which I had never been to before. And it was just awesome. And I was just so happy to be there. And I was kneeling down, I was praying before Mass, and Mass starts. And several times throughout the Mass, somebody dropped their kneeler. And it was just super loud. It was incredibly loud. Somebody dropped their kneeler. There was a baby that was in the church, and it was crying intermittently. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, man, again, like this is back-to-back days now. 2.5 months I've gone without receiving communion, without going to Mass. And all that time, just like when I was in Ranger School, I was in Afghanistan, or I was in the Dominican Republic, I'm visualizing and imagining and creating all these expectations of what life's going to be like on the other side of this challenge. And so I'm thinking to myself, you know, man, I can't wait to get back to Mass. And what I'm picturing is a Sunday Mass experience at St. Cecilia's in Cincinnati with my favorite priest and my favorite parish, the parish I belong to, as like my comeback Mass. But instead, I had these 2 rushed, unexpected experiences in Mass. And what I started to learn and to kind of develop in myself was, wow, when the kneeler slams, it's when the baby cries, it's when our expectations don't meet our reality, that we get to decide, am I going to choose to be grateful, or am I going to choose to start taking things for granted again? And that's really when that decision point kind of comes. And that's when we have to, on the other side of this, on the other side of quarantine, we're going to all have to make this decision. Are we going to be grateful for what we have? Are we going to be grateful for the experiences and the things that we get to do now? Or are we going to look at all the things that we still can't do? Are we going to look at all the things that are restricted, all the things that we're losing out on, all the things that are still a challenge in our lives? Because life is, you know, it's one of the things that I try to promote as much as possible, is that life is always going to be hard. We're always going to have to go without. We're always going to struggle. We're always going to have to overcome. But how can we focus on the things that we do have and make the most of those things and start to progress those things even further forward for future generations, for our family, for our friends, and for the people that look up to us and count on us during this time? And when you start to focus on those things, your perspective and your inspiration, your motivation just completely changes. You're able to maintain that same gratitude that you had, that you thought you would have on the other side of that adversity. You're able to continue that on after the struggle, which I think is such an important thing.